Okay, I thought I'd start it with maybe the book on the first screen. So hopefully then the video will have that book, and then we'll be able to tell which video it is just by looking at it. We'll see when I get done recording it. The snapshot that it takes of the video always surprises me. Okay, so we are in reasoning with a fallacy detective is this video. So let's review the fallacies that we have learned so far. So let's start with our avoiding the question fallacies. So red herring. So a red herring is when we introduce an irrelevant point, an irrelevant piece of information. And then an ad hominem, it attacks a person's character or a motive. Instead of disproving the argument, it's a personal attack. Let's see, special pleading. Let's do the special pleading one. That's the unjustified exception, making an action that they're doing an exception to the rule. Okay, and then the genetic fallacy. This condemns an argument from its origin, where or how or who began it. So it doesn't give any validity to the argument itself. It's faulty from the beginning. So that's the genetic fallacy. And then the tu quoque, the you too fallacy. This dismisses someone's point of an issue just because they are inconsistent of that very thing. And the example that we use in class is we can have a person that smokes, okay? They know they should quit, but for one reason or another they can't quit. But they also know that no one else should smoke, and they try to tell you not to do it because they know how addictive it is, how damaging it is, and they want to prevent you from that. So for someone to say, well, you have no right to tell me not to do this because you do the same thing. But that doesn't mean that they don't have validity in trying to tell you not to do it. So that's the tu quoque fallacy. The next one, the faulty appeal to authority, is an appeal to someone who has no special knowledge in the area being discussed. So when the example that was in our book is that when we would never take our computer, if our computer's broken, to our mechanic. Just because he can fix a car computer or knows how that computer in that car works doesn't mean he knows how our desktop or our laptop works. So if we said, well, my mechanic said that the problem with my computer, or that my computer is great because he knows a lot about computers, that's a faulty appeal to authority because his area of authority or specialty is automobile computers, not desktop computers. So that would be a faulty appeal to an authority. He is an authority on something else, not what we are referring to. Okay, appeal to the people. So this is claiming a viewpoint is correct just because many people believe it. Okay, so that's faulty. And we see that a lot in today. Going with the masses. So appealing to the people is a fallacy. Just because many believe it doesn't make it true. The straw man is our next one. A straw man is changing or exaggerating an opponent's viewpoint to make it easier to refute. So when they change it or they exaggerate this one point so that they can try to dispute it or refute it, is the straw man. Okay, so those are our avoiding the question fallacies. The next set of fallacies that we've been doing are assumption fallacies. So we start with circular reasoning, and this is the restating of a main point of an argument using different words. So it's making that circle, coming all the way back around. You're just restating it using it different words of an argument to make it appear stronger. The next one is equivocation, and this is when someone changes the meaning of a word in the middle of their argument. So you could have a word that means different things depending on the context it's using it, and then use it in that same argument of each of those meanings, and that's the fallacy of equivocation. And typically you get lost in that because all of a sudden your brain goes, wait, that's not what we were talking about. So that can a lot of times be easier to understand or to pinpoint, to be able to identify. All right, the next one in the assumption fallacies is the loaded question. Sorry, I was lost where I was. The loaded question. So, a loaded question is two questions in one, but one of those is hidden. And in class, we kind of focused on the court example, the courtroom example, when the attorney was trying to make the guy look guilty by asking two questions in one, with one being hidden, and he was ended up condemning himself. He was getting himself in trouble because he wasn't recognizing the question behind that and asking himself, what are you truly asking me? So that is loaded questions. Two questions in one, but one is hidden. And those are hard to find. That takes some thinking. We have to kind of slow down and really ask ourselves what's being asked. Okay, the next one is the slippery slope. The slippery slope assumes that if we take one step, nothing's going to stop us from taking a series of steps because they're all the same. And we see that a lot in current events today with that slippery slope. And in this last week, we talked about part to whole. So this is what is true of the part must be true of the whole thing together. And that is a fallacy because it's not necessarily. And then the other one, opposite of that, is whole to part. So what is true of the whole then must be true of each of its parts. And that's not necessarily true. So that's the fallacy of that. And then we have either or, which when someone insists we must choose between only two things, when in fact there are more alternatives. That's the either or. They're trying to narrow you down that you could this or this. When there's more options, that's the either or. Sometimes there's not, and then it is just either or in that situation. But if there are more alternatives than just those two, that's the either or fallacy. Okay, so that actually ends our assumption fallacies. We're actually starting a new section this week in week 10 that you're going to get into statistical fallacies. So we've had avoiding the question fallacies, the assumption fallacies, and then we're going to go into statistical fallacies. Okay, so let's talk about either or and loaded question. Let's compare those. So comparing how they're like and how they're different. So either or, remember we said when someone insists that we must choose between only two things, when there are in fact more alternatives. And then the loaded question is when there's two questions in one, but one's hitting. So they're alike because they deal with two. We know that they deal with two things, two questions or only two options. And then they're different because one is a question, and then one is a statement where they have to choose. So they're both dealing with two things, and then they're different because of one being a question, one being a choice between only those two things when there are more alternatives. Okay, let's see. We can't come up with, the best part of this seminar is watching you guys act out these fallacies in your own little skits, and we don't get to do that, so that's kind of a bummer. But what I do want you to do, review those definitions that I just went over. Those are all of the fallacies that we've come up with so far. Reviewing those, be looking for those. If you start watching the news with your parents, reading some current events. I know we'll get into those more, next year and the following years of challenge, but just kind of start doing that. Because as you are learning these fallacies, you're going to be able to recognize what is not valid in arguments being made today. So this week you are on lessons 22 and 23, generalization and hasty generalizations. And you're going to read those and do those exercises. And again, just be looking in the world around you to see if you can locate those fallacies. And if you do, let me know them. Text them to me, have your mama text them to me, somebody, just so as you see those, that you can start recognizing them, because that's the step of wisdom, is that we know what they are when we are able to identify them. So, okay, I think that is all in the fallacy detective. That should wrap up this video. Okay.